The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet streets of Oakwood as Walter Jenkins carefully drove his well-maintained 2010 Buick through the familiar neighborhood. At 72, Walter took pride in doing things properly. His car gleamed from the weekly wash he gave it every Sunday after church. His posture remained straight despite his age, a habit from his 40 years of dedicated service at the postal office, where he never missed a day of work. Today was pension day. Walter had just left Oakwood Community Bank with an envelope containing $2,300 tucked safely in his inner jacket pocket. The money would cover his monthly expenses, with a little set aside for his grandson's college fund. Walter hummed along to the smooth jazz playing softly on the radio, thinking about stopping by his favorite diner for a slice of sweet potato pie before heading home. The flash of blue and red lights in his rearview mirror interrupted his peaceful moment. Walter checked his speedometer. He was going precisely 3 miles under the speed limit, as he always did. His brow furrowed with confusion as he carefully signaled and pulled over to the shoulder of Maple Road, a quiet back street he took to avoid the main highway traffic. 2 officers approached his vehicle, one on each side. The taller one, whose nameplate read Briggs, tapped on the driver's window with his knuckles. Walter lowered it immediately. "License and registration," Officer Briggs demanded without a greeting, his tone flat and official. "Good afternoon, officer," Walter replied politely, reaching slowly for his wallet. "May I ask what seems to be the problem?" Officer Briggs stared down at Walter, not acknowledging the courteous question. "You've got a broken tail light." Walter's face registered surprise. "A broken light? That can't be right. I just had the car inspected last week. Everything passed." The second officer, Reynolds, circled around the back of the car. "Yep, right side's out," he called, though Walter couldn't see for himself. Walter handed over his license and the registration he kept neatly in the glove compartment. "I'll get that fixed first thing tomorrow, officers. I certainly didn't realize." Officer Briggs studied the documents longer than seemed necessary. His eyes flickered from the license to Walter's face repeatedly. "Step out of the vehicle, please," Briggs finally said. "Excuse me?" Walter asked, genuinely confused. "I said step out of the vehicle, sir." The "sir" sounded more like an afterthought than respect. Walter carefully undid his seatbelt and stepped out, straightening his jacket. The envelope shifted in his pocket. He stood tall next to his car, the same dignified manner he carried through decades of life's challenges. "What's in your pocket?" Officer Reynolds asked suddenly, pointing at the slight bulge in Walter's jacket. "Just my pension money," Walter explained calmly. "I've come from the bank. I go every 3rd Thursday of the month." "Mind if we check?" Officer Briggs asked, though his tone suggested it wasn't really a question. Before Walter could properly respond, Officer Reynolds was already reaching toward his jacket. Walter felt a flash of indignation, but kept his composure. His son Marcus had always reminded him how important it was to stay calm during police encounters, no matter the circumstance. "I'd prefer if you didn't," Walter said firmly but politely. "I've done nothing wrong." The officers exchanged glances. "We have reason to believe you might be carrying illegal substances," Officer Briggs stated, though no such reason existed. Walter's heart began to beat faster, but his voice remained steady. "That's simply not true, officers. I'm a retired postal worker heading home from the bank." As the situation escalated on that quiet street, Walter had no idea that this encounter would soon reach his son's desk, the very man who had sworn to transform the police department when he became its first black chief 6 months ago. The tension in the air thickened as Walter stood beside his Buick, the afternoon sun no longer feeling warm but harsh against his skin. Officer Briggs stood uncomfortably close, while Officer Reynolds began walking around the vehicle, peering through windows with exaggerated interest. "We're going to need to search your car, sir," Officer Briggs announced, not as a request, but as a statement of what would happen next. Walter's decades of life experience told him this wasn't right. "Officer, I don't believe you have cause to search my vehicle. I was supposedly stopped for a taillight. Officer Reynolds snorted. We have reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. What criminal activity? Walter asked, his voice remaining calm despite the hammering in his chest. He had lived through the civil rights movement, had seen changes come slowly over decades. At 72, he knew when to stand his ground and when to protect himself. Neither officer answered his question. Instead, Officer Briggs pulled open the driver's door. Keys in the ignition. Walter didn't respond, silently protesting the injustice unfolding before him. Officer Reynolds opened the glove compartment, rifling through Walter's neatly organized vehicle documents. Finding nothing of interest, he moved to the center console, then checked under the seats. Sir, empty your pockets, Officer Briggs demanded, turning his attention back to Walter. I do not consent to a search of my person, Walter stated firmly, remembering the advice from the community rights workshop his son Marcus had organized last year. Am I being detained? The officers exchanged glances that made Walter's stomach tighten. Yes, you are, Officer Briggs replied, his hand moving to rest on his belt. Now empty your pockets or we'll do it for you. Walter weighed his options carefully. At his age, resistance could lead to physical harm. With a deep sigh that carried the weight of too many similar stories he'd heard throughout his life, he slowly reached into his outer pockets, producing his keys and a handkerchief. All of them, Officer Reynolds prompted, gesturing toward Walter's jacket. With reluctance, Walter reached into his inner pocket and removed the bank envelope. Officer Briggs snatched it immediately, opening it to reveal the neatly stacked bills inside. What do we have here? Officer Briggs whistled, thumbing through the cash. That's a lot of money to be carrying around. As I told you, it's my pension. I just came from the bank. You can call them to verify. I have the withdrawal receipt right here. Walter reached for his wallet, but Officer Reynolds grabbed his wrist. Hands where we can see them, Reynolds warned. Officer Briggs continued counting the money. $2,300. That's suspicious amounts of cash to be carrying in this neighborhood. This is my neighborhood, Walter pointed out. I've lived here for 40 years. The officers ignored him. Officer Briggs tucked the envelope into his own pocket and pulled out a small notepad. He scribbled something quickly, tore off the page, and handed it to Walter. What's this? Walter asked, looking down at the nearly illegible handwriting. Receipt for civil asset forfeiture. Suspected connection to narcotics distribution. Officer Briggs stated matter-of-factly. Walter stared at the paper in disbelief. The amount written was only $1,100, less than half of what had been in the envelope. This is wrong, Walter protested, his voice finally showing emotion. This is theft. That money has nothing to do with any drugs. I've never touched drugs in my life. I need that money for my bills, for my grandson's college fund. You can file an appeal with the court if you want it back, Officer Reynolds said with a smirk. Good luck with that. Process usually takes about a year, if it goes through at all. The officers returned to their patrol car without another word, leaving Walter standing beside his Buick, holding a worthless piece of paper. As they drove away, Walter's hand trembled, not from age, but from anger and humiliation. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to his son's number. He needed a ride home now, but he wasn't sure how to tell Marcus what had happened. His son had enough pressure being the new police chief without having to deal with this. What Walter didn't realize was that his call would set in motion events that would shake the entire department to its core. Walter Jenkins sat on the curb beside his Buick, the receipt for his seized money crumpled in his weathered hand. The afternoon had turned cool, but the chill he felt came from within. 40 years at the Postal Service, never a single mark against his name. And now this, treated like a criminal on a street he had walked since before these officers were born. He stared at his phone for several minutes before finally making the call. His thumb hovered over Marcus's name in his contacts. Walter had always solved his own problems. Even after his wife Sarah passed 5 years ago, he had managed everything himself, from fixing the leaky roof to handling all the paperwork. He had never wanted to be a burden to his son, especially now that Marcus carried the weight of an entire police department on his shoulders. The phone rang 3 times before Marcus's voice came through. "Dad? Everything okay?" Marcus always seemed to sense when something was wrong. "I'm fine, son," Walter answered automatically, the words coming out strained. "But I need a ride home. I'm on Maple Road, just past the old Johnson place." "Your car break down?" Marcus asked, concern evident in his voice. Walter paused. "Something like that. Nothing to worry about, just need a lift." "I'll be there in 10 minutes, Marcus replied without hesitation. Walter ended the call and looked up at the sky. How much should he tell Marcus? As police chief, his son had been working tirelessly to change the department's culture, to build bridges with communities that had long distrusted the police. This incident would hurt him deeply, both as a son and as a leader. True to his word, Marcus's personal car, a modest sit-in, pulled up exactly 10 minutes later. He stepped out, still in his uniform, his chief's badge catching the late afternoon light. At 43, Marcus carried himself with the confidence of someone who had earned his position through merit and determination, rising through the ranks despite obstacles that many of his white colleagues never faced. "Dad?" Marcus called out, his brow furrowing when he saw Walter sitting on the curb. "What happened? Are you hurt?" Walter slowly rose to his feet, his knees protesting after sitting in the cold. "Not hurt, son. Just..." He gestured toward his car. "They said I had a broken tail light." Marcus walked around the Buick, checking both tail lights, which were perfectly intact. He turned to his father, his expression darkening. "Who said?" "2 of your officers, Briggs and Reynolds." Marcus went still. "They stopped you for a tail light that isn't broken." Walter nodded, the anger he'd been suppressing beginning to surface. "They searched my car without permission. Then they took my pension money, said it was suspicious, gave me this." He handed over the crumpled receipt. Marcus stared at the paper, his jaw tightening as he read. When he looked up, his eyes held a controlled fury that Walter recognized from when Marcus was a boy facing injustice at school. "They took $2,300 from you and wrote a receipt for $1,100, Marcus stated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Did they know who you are? Who I am?" Walter shook his head. "My license has my old address, and you know I've never been one to drop names." Marcus placed a gentle hand on his father's shoulder. "Tell me everything, Dad. From the beginning. Don't leave anything out." As Walter recounted the incident in detail, he could see his son shifting between roles, from concerned son to police chief gathering evidence. Marcus took notes in a small pad he carried, asking careful questions about times, exact words spoken, and actions taken. "I didn't want to tell you," Walter admitted when he finished. "You have enough to deal with. I thought maybe I'd just file that appeal they mentioned." Marcus's expression softened. "Dad, this is exactly what I need to deal with. This is why I became chief. This stops now." As they drove away from the scene, Walter stared out the window at his beloved neighborhood. For the first time since the incident, he felt a glimmer of hope. His son had always been a man of his word. What officers Briggs and Reynolds didn't know was that their routine harassment of an elderly black man was about to become the catalyst for change they never saw coming. Retroius. The next morning, Police Chief Marcus Jenkins arrived at the department headquarters an hour earlier than usual. The building was quiet, with only a few night shift officers finishing their reports before heading home. Marcus nodded to them as he passed, his face revealing nothing of the storm brewing inside him. In his office, Marcus carefully closed the blinds before sitting at his computer. As the system powered up, he removed a small notebook from his breast pocket and reviewed the detailed notes he had taken during his father's account. Years of police work had taught him to be methodical, to let evidence rather than emotion drive his actions. Today, he would need that discipline more than ever. First, Marcus pulled up the officers' shift records. Both Briggs and Reynolds had been on patrol in his father's neighborhood yesterday between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock p.m., matching Walter's timeline perfectly. Next, he accessed the dashboard camera footage from their patrol car. There was his father's Buick, being pulled over at 2:47 p.m. on Maple Road. "Computer, enhance and zoom on the rear of the vehicle," Marcus commanded, his voice steady despite his rising anger. The image cleared, showing both of his father's taillights working perfectly. The official reason for the stop was already proven false. Marcus then checked the body camera logs. Both officers had been wearing their department-required cameras. According to protocol, these should have been activated the moment they initiated the traffic stop. He pulled up Officer Briggs's footage first. The video began as Briggs approached Walter's car. The conversation matched exactly what Walter had described, but what made Marcus's blood run cold was what came before the stop, footage the officer had failed to properly delete. "Let's follow that old guy." Reynolds's voice came through clearly on the recording. "Bet he just came from the bank on pension day." Briggs laughed. "These old-timers always carry cash. Civil asset forfeiture. Split the paperwork." The officer's body cameras captured everything. The false claim about the taillight, the unlawful search, the counting of the money. $2,300, just as Walter had said. The footage even showed Officer Briggs pocketing part of the cash before writing the receipt for the lesser amount. Marcus felt a pain in his palms and realized he had been clenching his fists so tightly that his nails had dug into his skin. He forced himself to relax, to breathe deeply. He had expected to find evidence of misconduct, but this went beyond that. This was criminal behavior caught on camera. For the next 2 hours, Marcus compiled everything. The camera footage, the patrol records, his father's statement, and photographs of the intact taillights. He saved multiple copies to secure servers, knowing that what he was about to do would send shockwaves through the department. As he worked, the office gradually filled with the morning shift personnel. Marcus remained in his office, declining calls and postponing meetings. This situation required his full attention. By noon, his investigation was complete. Marcus called his assistant. "Sandra, schedule a mandatory department meeting for 4 o'clock p.m. today. All available personnel, including Officers Briggs and Reynolds." "Yes, Chief. May I tell them what it's regarding?" "Just say it's a policy review." As Sandra left, Marcus stared at the photographs of his father on his desk, Walter in his postal uniform on his retirement day, Walter holding baby Marcus, Walter standing proudly at Marcus's police academy graduation. The love and pride in his father's eyes in those photos made the injustice of yesterday's events even more painful. Marcus picked up the phone to call the district attorney, then paused. No, this needed to unfold in a specific way. Justice would come. But first, Officers Briggs and Reynolds needed to understand exactly who they had targeted, and more importantly, why their behavior was intolerable regardless of who the victim had been. The stage was set for a confrontation that would transform the department forever. At exactly 4 o'clock p.m., the main conference room of the police headquarters was filled to capacity. Officers from various units sat around the long table or stood against the walls, murmuring among themselves about the unexpected meeting. At one end of the table, Officers Briggs and Reynolds lounged in their chairs, looking bored and slightly annoyed at having their patrol shift interrupted. Chief Marcus Jenkins entered the room precisely on time, carrying a laptop and a thin folder. The room immediately fell silent. In his 6 months as chief, Marcus had gained respect for his fairness and professionalism, even from those who had initially resented his appointment. "Thank you all for being here," Marcus began, his voice measured and calm. "Before we discuss departmental policies, I want to share some footage that has recently come to my attention." He connected his laptop to the projector and dimmed the lights. Without further introduction, he played the video from Officer Briggs's body camera, starting with the conversation between the two officers before they pulled over Walter's car. As the footage played, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Some officers stared at the floor, uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Others watched intently, their expressions hardening. Officers Briggs and Reynolds, initially smirking, gradually straightened in their chairs as they realized what was being shown. When the video ended, Marcus turned the lights back on and looked directly at Briggs and Reynolds. "Would either of you care to explain what I just showed everyone?" Officer Briggs cleared his throat. "Chief, with all due respect, this was a routine civil asset forfeiture. We had reasonable suspicion." "Reasonable suspicion of what?" Marcus interrupted, his voice still calm but edged with steel. "The suspect was in a high-crime area with a large amount of cash." Reynolds jumped in. "Standard procedure is tow. That high-crime area, as you call it," Marcus cut him off again, "has one of the lowest crime rates in our jurisdiction. And the suspect was a 72-year-old man driving home from the bank on pension day. What exactly made you suspicious, Officer Reynolds?" Neither officer answered. The silence in the room was heavy, charged with tension. Marcus opened the folder and laid out photographs of Walter's car showing both tail lights working perfectly. "You claimed the stop was for a broken tail light. That was false." He placed the bank withdrawal slip on the table next. "You seized $2,300 as suspected drug money, but only documented $1,100 on this receipt. That's theft and falsification of police records." Marcus walked slowly around the table, placing each piece of evidence in front of the increasingly uncomfortable officers. "You violated departmental policy on reasonable suspicion, proper search procedures, and asset forfeiture documentation. You violated state law on police conduct, and you violated federal civil rights statutes." The chief finally stopped directly across from the two officers. His voice remained steady, but everyone in the room could feel the controlled anger behind his words. "But what you didn't know," Marcus continued, "was that the man you targeted, the man you humiliated and stole from, was Walter Jenkins, my father." The shock on the officers' faces would have been almost comical under different circumstances. Reynolds' mouth opened and closed without producing any sound. Briggs seemed to shrink in his chair. "Chief, we didn't," Briggs began. Marcus raised his hand, silencing him. "That's the point, Officer Briggs. You didn't know, and it shouldn't matter. Every person in our jurisdiction deserves the same respect and protection under the law, regardless of who they are or who they're related to." Marcus turned to address the entire room. "This is why we're implementing new training protocols, why we're reviewing every asset forfeiture case from the past 5 years, why we're installing new oversight measures. What happened to my father happens to too many people in our community, and it stops now." He looked back at Briggs and Reynolds. "You two, stay after the meeting. Everyone else, dismissed." As the room emptied, the two officers sat frozen in their chairs, suddenly understanding the full gravity of what they had done and who they had done it to. The two officers sat rigid in their chairs as the conference room emptied. Chief Jenkins remained standing, his expression unreadable as he gathered his evidence materials with deliberate calm. The large wall clock ticked loudly in the silence, each second stretching uncomfortably. When the last officer closed the door, Marcus finally spoke. "Officer Briggs, where is my father's money?" Briggs swallowed hard. "In the evidence locker, sir." "All of it?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. A moment of hesitation. Not all of it, Chief." Marcus nodded as if this confirmation was expected. "You have until the end of today to return every dollar. I don't care if you have to empty your bank accounts." "Yes, sir," both officers mumbled, staring at the table. "As of this moment, you are both suspended without pay pending a full investigation. Your badges and service weapons stay here." Marcus's voice remained even, professional, betraying none of the rage he felt as both a son and as chief. Reynolds finally looked up. "Chief, we're sorry. If we had known he was your father." "That's exactly the problem." Marcus cut him off. "You think this is about who my father is. It's not. It's about who you are, and what this department stands for." Marcus opened a drawer in the conference room credenza and pulled out 2 formal letters. These detail the internal affairs investigation that begins tomorrow. The district attorney has also been notified and will be pursuing criminal charges. Officer Reynolds, you've been with this department for 7 years. Briggs, you're going on 5. Both of you knew better. Reynolds paled. Criminal charges. Chief, please. The decision isn't mine, Marcus replied. The evidence will speak for itself. The DA viewed the footage this afternoon. Briggs ran his hands over his face. This will end our careers. Your actions yesterday ended your careers, Marcus corrected him. What happens next is about accountability. A soft knock interrupted them. Sandra, the chief's assistant, opened the door slightly. Chief, the media is gathering outside. Someone leaked about the suspensions. Marcus nodded. Thank you, Sandra. Tell them I'll make a statement in 30 minutes. After she left, Marcus turned back to the officers. This isn't just about one incident. The investigation has already uncovered 7 similar complaints against you 2 in the past year alone, all involving older citizens, all involving cash seizures, all in neighborhoods with predominantly black and brown residents. The officers exchanged nervous glances. You didn't know it, but your body cameras recorded more than you realized. The small talk between you and the patrol car, the comments about whose money would be easy pickings. The system automatically uploads and archives footage, even when you think you've deleted it. Marcus placed a hand on the table, leaning forward. I became chief to change things, to build trust between this department and all the communities we serve. I believe that most officers wanted the same thing. He straightened up. I still believe that, which is why I can't allow officers like you to undermine everything we're working toward. Both men remained silent as the full weight of their situation sank in. You'll be escorted to clean out your lockers. Department counselors are available if you need them. Marcus gathered his files. I hope you both find a way to make this right, not just with my father, but with everyone else you've harmed. As Marcus turned to leave, Reynolds called out, Chief, how is your father doing? The question caught Marcus off guard. He paused at the door. He's shaken, embarrassed, angry. He worked for 40 years serving this community, and this is how he was treated in return. Marcus stepped out of the conference room to face the storm of media attention waiting outside, leaving behind 2 men whose actions had finally caught up with them. The road to rebuilding trust would be long, but this day marked a critical first step, a public acknowledgement that no abuse of power would be tolerated, no matter who the victim was. Retroius. 6 months had passed since the incident that shook the Oakwood Police Department. On a bright spring morning, the community center buzzed with activity as residents filled every seat. At the front of the room stood a podium with the department's emblem, and beside it sat Walter Jenkins, dressed in his Sunday best, his posture as straight and dignified as ever. Chief Marcus Jenkins approached the podium, the morning light catching on his badge. The room quieted immediately. In the past 6 months, Marcus had become something of a local hero, not just for standing up for his father, but for the sweeping changes he had implemented throughout the department. Good morning, Marcus began, his voice strong and clear. Thank you all for coming today. 6 months ago, an incident occurred that many of you have heard about. My own father was wrongfully stopped, searched, and had his pension money taken from him by officers who abused their power and betrayed the trust of this community. Walter nodded slightly, acknowledging the sympathetic glances from those around him. Today, I'm proud to announce the official launch of the Community Oversight Committee and our new departmental policies on racial bias training, body camera usage, and asset forfeiture reform. Marcus gestured to a table where stacks of booklets outlined the new initiatives in detail. These changes didn't happen in isolation, Marcus continued. They happened because my father had the courage to speak up, and because this community demanded better from those sworn to protect and serve. In the front row sat Councilwoman Rodriguez and Reverend Thompson, who had worked closely with Marcus to develop the new policies. Behind them were dozens of community members who had shared their own stories of police encounters during the town halls Marcus had organized in recent months. As many of you know, the 2 officers involved in my father's case were terminated following a thorough investigation, Marcus said. Last week, they both pleaded guilty to theft and misconduct charges. But this was never about punishing 2 individuals. It was about changing a system that allowed such behavior to flourish. Walter stood up slowly and joined his son at the podium. "I'd like to say something, if I may," the elder Jenkins said, his voice softer but no less powerful than his son's. "What happened to me that day was nothing new. It's happened to many folks in this community for years. The difference is that my son was in a position to do something about it." Walter looked out at the diverse faces before him. "That's why we've established the Jenkins Community Foundation. Using the settlement money from my case, we'll provide legal support to others who faced similar situations but don't have a police chief for a son." Applause filled the room as Walter unveiled a large poster showing the foundation's first initiative, a legal aid clinic staffed by volunteer attorneys from across the city. "My father taught me that real change requires more than just words," Marcus said, placing a hand on Walter's shoulder. "It requires action, accountability, and community involvement." As the formal presentation ended and people gathered around the refreshment tables, Marcus noticed a young officer approaching Walter. "Mr. Jenkins," the young woman said, extending her hand. "I just wanted to thank you. I joined the force to make a difference, but I was starting to wonder if one person could change anything. You and your son showed me it's possible." Walter smiled, shaking her hand warmly. "What's your name, officer?" "Torres, sir. I'm part of the new community outreach unit your son created." Walter nodded approvingly. "Well, Officer Torres, remember this. Sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes, if we have the courage to see them through." As Walter watched his son speaking with community members, pride swelled in his chest. The pain of that day 6 months ago hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something powerful, a catalyst for the changes their community had needed for generations. Sometimes justice came in unexpected ways, at unexpected times, from unexpected people. Retriclaude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. 3.7 Sonnet.